Thanks for listening to Fluff and Crunch, where we talk about the connection and sometimes disconnect between system, setting, and story in tabletop RPGs. On this computer, and I am recording. Good morning. Again.
Hi, Jeremy.
How are you, Chris?
Yeah, good, thanks.
You had a nice soccer game over the weekend? Sorry, football.
Yeah, it was a good football game. Yeah, because we won. So 4-0. Very good.
Very good. Very good.
So all the goals are at the other end, which is a bit annoying. Happens every time we sit at an end rather on the side. Oh, it's so annoying.
You bring little binoculars?
No, it's not that bad, but it's just irritating.
Yeah. Yep. Did you do any gaming this last week?
I did now. Let's see. Yeah, Thursday. Did I run? Who ran? Yeah, I ran a session where I ran a dungeon where the ideas for the dungeons had come from is it GTP? I can't remember.
GPT, like Golf Papa Tango. GPT.
The AI thing. So because I was like, basically both the others went, I haven't got time to do it, and I was like, I guess I'll do it then. So I put in a base description of what I wanted and did it about 4 times, and then took the ideas for different rooms and created a dungeon based on that, because I didn't need a map really. And that was my dungeon. So yeah, and it went pretty well.
Give me a little bit of detail. Like what did you put in and what did it spit out?
Ooh, what did I put in? I mean, I'd have to show. I could show you the file. I feel like this is something we could do for an episode, because I haven't done it a lot, but it's certainly we can do for an episode at some point to kind of go, to look at now and then come back to it in a future date, and when we're better at it. It's very much what you put in. I literally put in 2 lines. Like I want a dungeon set in a pyramid related to the Egyptian gods for 2 characters of level 6. It didn't really do the leveling stuff, but with like puzzles, monsters, and traps or something. And every time I run it gives you slightly different things. So sometimes I'd run it and it would actually give me difficulties and damage things, and then other times it wouldn't, and sometimes it would. But it took that and gave me a kind of description of every room. And I also tried the new Google one, and it was, in comparison, was like 1 line for every thing, whereas this was giving me like sort of 3 or 4 lines for every single room. And some of them would give more details. So and then I put in riddles, and it actually gave me a riddle that I could ask the player. So it's to some extent what you put in is what you get. If you put in a much better, clearer description of what you want, you'll get a better output. If you put in a kind of very vague thing, you'll get something vague. But I think you can then improve on it. So Brian said, well, you can take what you've got and then we'll improve on this. I want more of this or less of that, and then it will give you more. So yeah, it's something to. I don't think you could just take what you get out of it and run with that. But for coming up with ideas, if you're short on time, it was really good for that. So I literally.
I haven't played with that thing at all. I've puttered with like 2 or 3 different AI art sites, but I frankly have, aside from reading articles about people either saying this is going to be wonderful and it's going to usher us into a new era of humanity, I'm like, whatever, or it's going to be horrible and ruinous. That's pretty much all I've read so far. So in terms of like actual experience with or puttering with the things, I've got next to nothing. So if you've got links to those, if you want to send them to me, that'd be great. But yeah, I think we should do an episode about that. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, it was. I've not used it before for anything really, so It was my first time.
Cool.
And it worked quite well.
Well, once again, unfortunately, my game didn't go off. Garg. Well, our GM was busy doing something else, and then another one of my players was out of town or busy, so it was just me and one of my players. And actually, though, you know what, we got together anyway, and we played this board game that I had just gotten from a Kickstarter. It's like a year and a half, almost 2 years ago, and all the China slowdowns made it very, very late. But it's called Fighters of the Pacific, and it's like a one to one, you control a group of single aircraft against other single aircraft. Super simple rules, but actually in a chess-like way, a lot of nuance and a lot of layers to it. It was really fun. I'm interested in playing more, but we just played a really simple scenario that had just one type of aircraft against one other type of aircraft. But there are more complex ones with more kinds of aircraft, and then there are also ones that have ships or islands, and a lot of them are historically based. So, have you ever heard of a board game called Memoir 44?
Yeah, but I can't. Yeah, is it like a World War II
Yeah.
thing? I don't know why, but then yeah, the name's familiar.
Yeah, if anyone's listening, if you're familiar with Memoir 44, the setup of this Fighters of the Pacific is very similar to that. It's a hex board, and you use a generic board to recreate, using different arrangements of pieces, different battles and scenarios. So I want to play that more. It was a lot of fun. A lot of fun. And otherwise, the only gaming stuff that I've been doing is hammering away at my SRD work. I'm over 100 pages now.
That's a lot.
And now and that's over 100 pages of my content. And I'm taking the GM's chapter from the SRD, and I'm going to pare it down and change parts of it and put in what I think is useful, without, I don't want to try to provide like a kitchen sink. It's really, one thing I'm learning with this is that it's very easy to start off with an intention of making something light and simple, and then a few hours of work later, you're making something detailed and crunchy that you hadn't intended to make, because you just get into it. So I have to remind myself of that, but it's coming along. I've got some folks testing and looking at the magic system, which I cleaned up a bunch of, and anyway, so coming along, and then I'll release it and I'll make my millions and I'll buy my private island.
Yeah,
Oh yeah,
that's not going to happen.
The lucrative
Role
tabletop.
play. No one makes that kind of money out of role play.
No. What could be a very small private island? Like your Bugs Bunny sitting on a looking at looking at Daffy Duck, and his head turns into like a mutton chop or something like that, and it's just a little patch of sand with a single palm tree on it. Maybe that. But all that aside, you wanted to talk about, and I think it's a good idea to talk about. What are we talking about today?
I think we say fantasy story ideas, because we did sci-fi and we thought
Yep.
fantasy is a good place to start with.
Yep. And trying to take some interesting ideas, maybe come up with some interesting ideas, but then also we did Octo and Cthulhu too. Remember that?
Yeah.
But come up with some ways to make the tropes, of which there are many, for fantasy, ways to blow the dust off them and put a new shine on the tropes.
Yeah. I mean, I think we had a short talk about this previously, and kind of I think we need to split it into how your starting point, your hook, your grab for the players, and then actually what the adventure is. Because obviously the start and the what you do are two completely separate things. It's kind of similar how we looked at with the sci-fi, although sci-fi, a lot of time we rolled those in. So I'm going to go back to the one I said last week, which was the classic properly cheesy, which I have used in my campaign, which is
Who hasn't?
You're in the tavern, and someone, probably an old wizard or some guy, comes in and offer you a mission. And that's literally how I started my my most recent campaign thing. But I didn't put a twist on it initially. I was like, if we're doing a whole D&D year, I'm going to start with the tropiest of tropes to start with, and why not? But then I span that by then having, after that, another wizard comes in the second session and says, wait a minute, the last guy was the bad guy, and you've worked for him and stolen this stuff, and did you even check who he was? And of course they went, well, no, we were being good players and doing what we were suggesting.
Isn't that the basic plot of the movie? I think it is. Like I
think it's going well, yeah, because we don't. All we know at the moment, because it's not out yet, is that they've stolen something, and it's ended up with the wrong people. So yeah, it's entirely possible they've stolen something which was well protected for a reason and given it to the bad guys. So.
Yeah, I think the idea was that their patron who involved them in this job was actually the bad guy. Now they have to set things straight, which is also the same. Do you ever hear of a show called Leverage?
Oh yeah, I watched
Okay.
it all.
That
Well,
was,
not
yeah,
entirely.
we yeah, love that show. But the first
Yeah.
episode, the pilot, was exactly that. So anyway, all right. So you've got the separation between where it takes place, the setting, the physical environs, call it the situation in which the kickoff takes place, and then you've got what was the wording you used for the other?
Well, so the what the what you do. I mean, in this case, it was a go into a dungeon, get thing, which is the most standard D&D thing you can possibly have. There's a
Yeah,
dungeon. The easiest reason to go into a dungeon, either someone else has gone in the dungeon, you need to go and get them back, or there's a thing in the dungeon that you need to go and get, or there's a thing in the dungeon you need to go and kill. Those are, I mean, pretty much those are the only three reasons you're really going to go into dungeon, beyond just a dungeon exists,
right, right.
kill stuff, get money.
Well,
Um,
but your the things you mentioned before account for that. Okay, dungeon exists. Why do I care? Other
yeah,
than let's go sightseeing in a dangerous place, which sounds like a bad idea. There's something there we want. There's something there that someone else wants that is either that for some reason we're willing to go do that for them. Um, or maybe you could say there's a threat from there that we're trying to stop.
yeah. There's a
Because
horde of goblins in the dungeon that
always do that.
need to be wiped out. I mean, at least that one's kind of making sense. The goblins are there, they're hiding there. You need to go and clean out the goblins. It's
Yeah.
the whole, there's this weird hodgepodge of completely separate monsters and traps that's just sitting there waiting for someone to come in. And I mean, that's why I came up by the third dungeon. I came up with this idea of a living dungeon that essentially repopulates itself to explain just why dungeons exist, because it doesn't
Yeah.
make sense. And he said, and even the first one actually was like, it was a wizard's like testing arena, but they weren't told that. So I've tried to make the dungeons have some kind of sense to them, because the reality is dungeons don't really make a huge amount of sense.
No.
There's this ruin there. Okay, so it should be empty. No. Not only is it not empty, there's treasure there which hasn't been collected. There's monsters in there which somehow living, despite having nothing to eat other than each other, but they're all in separate rooms. Oh, and there's a bunch of traps which have never been triggered or somehow re-trigger themselves. Dungeons don't really make a lot of sense. I
Zero.
kind of think that's, I'm not sure you should explain it. I think that's just be the beauty of D&D.
Yeah, no one asks why the party is made up of the celestial, the tiefling, the dragonborn, the dwarf, poet, warrior, cleric. This is especially now this like weirdo kitchen sink approach. It's better to just not scrape the surface at all.
Yeah, it's like I mean, it's the same way I don't think the trope's that bad a trope, because you're really, that's not what would happen in real life. We said this last time. Well, how many jobs in real life, right? There's this really dangerous place we want you to go into with possibly a promise after you've done it, it will pay you. I mean, yeah, if you're a professional firefighter or a soldier, police, most things aren't genuinely that dangerous. And
Well,
also, these people aren't sitting around. These are people that are paid to do
yeah,
that job, not
yeah.
on a retainer.
You're not going there getting a bonus.
Yeah.
Like yeah, yeah. Okay. So you explicitly though mentioned dungeon. That I think takes up a special and like call it permanent place in fantasy stories.
It does in terms of fancy role-playing games, but
Yeah.
I don't think it does so much in sort of literature.
No, that's
mean,
that's what I meant. I meant
yeah,
in,
you can
in
you can
games.
argue that, oh well, in Lord of the Rings they go through, but in Lord of the Rings they go through a mountain which had some dwarven things and there's some goblins like that. But it's not a dungeon.
Well, I think though
Um,
the term dungeon is about as specific in tabletop role playing as
yeah,
excellence is in education, which
yeah,
is to
that's true.
say it means nothing anymore.
Yeah,
It's an underground labyrinth or not even a labyrinth. It's just an underground complex of
well,
some sort.
it doesn't have to be even underground, does it? It's a collection of encounters in a physical or
Yeah, in a
potentially not
confined
physical,
space.
in
I
a
do
confined
think the
space.
implication though is there's got to be at least part of it that's underground.
It feels like it should be. But just if you're going back to the old idea of levels as well, levels
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
dungeon, um, that's a whole nother thing. It's like a
Now,
whole episode on dungeon design.
you could then extend that easily to it doesn't have to be a dungeon. It's just a place Which, I mean, really, that's universal. You are asked by a patron to go to a place to retrieve a thing, which could be a person. You're asked by a patron, um, what was it? There were three. We had
Well, I said,
protect from threat at place. We had go to place and get thing for patron, go to place and get thing for yourself.
yeah, or go to place and kill something for whatever reason.
Right. Okay, go to place and do job there.
Yeah.
And I mean that could apply to anything. That could apply to a castle. That could apply to like a mountaintop redoubt. That could apply to a hidden river valley, or who knows? I mean, that could apply to all kinds of things.
I think one of the things that makes it different between fantasy and other things. So, like, if you compare to say sci-fi, if you're going somewhere to get something, and then we refer to that as a heist, and in a heist, and we can come back to heist later as a fantasy thing, but a heist would, in theory, have consequence. Someone else, you're taking someone else's stuff.
Yeah.
Dungeons have this idea of being sort of like it's a victimless crime. There's some treasure there. So when you go and take the treasure, it was no one's treasure. That treasure was whoever got there first, which is, the players. So then, it's a different thing. There is no consequence. Now, that again, there's ways of changing that, which is what I did my first one, which is actually it was a dungeon, but it was this particular wizard's dungeon, and he was using it as a testing. So when at the end they got the stuff and took it off, the wizard then told that was my stuff. You've taken my, I'm not happy with you. So it did have a consequence to it. Or you can have go on.
How can we make the dungeon, okay? And let's have it be a dungeon. Like it is an underground complex of at least a few rooms connected either by walls or corridors. There's our definition: subterranean complex with multiple rooms. How can we make the dungeon? You're either going to it to get something from it, you're going there to do a job at it, or that would include going there to like eliminate a threat that's emanating from it. You either do it because it is of interest to the characters, or because some patron that you met at a drinking establishment, putting that aside, has hired you or encouraged you or retained you, whatever, to do that. How can we make the dungeon, I've got some ideas, more interesting? How can you put a spin on something? Because I enjoy that, actually. I like the idea of taking something that everyone's like, it's kind of fun to go back and do the thing that you've done a bajillion and one times, but you haven't done it in a long time. You're like, oh, that'll be interesting. It'll be kind of refreshing. It'll take me back. But how could you do that with your players and give them a little something that would make it, to twist it, to make it a little more memorable? I've got some ideas.
Go on then.
Oh, goody. Okay. Okay. You talked about, and you just made me think of this, the idea of, the dungeon is the victim. It's the heist. It's the breaking and entering. Okay, and it's both burglary and armed robbery. In U.S. law, the difference is burglary is a property crime. Armed robbery involves a human being, and is thus taken more seriously. It's both those things, but it's considered a victimless crime, as you said, because somehow no one owns the thing. What if you had a dungeon that exists on the periphery, or it doesn't necessarily have to be, of an area that is claimed by, let's just make it easy, some noble. And so there's like a trespassing, or like a taxation. Oh, that could really piss off your players. Okay, so you go to the dungeon, and you get hired, and you go there, and it's, oh, you must retrieve the scepter of blah blah blah. Okay, great. And you can keep all the spoils. I'll give you the secret map, and here's the sigil that will get you in the front door from the wizened old guy at the tavern. Like, that's like perfect first edition type stuff. So the players go do that. They go do their fight and all that stuff. But then when they come up out of it, there's a team of like armed tax collectors who are there to process and say, okay, now that this dungeon exists within the realm of Duke blah 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 blah, and you have to now cough up this percentage.
Yeah, that's good. It's kind of, there was this book I was reading reasonably recently where it kind of had that idea that it's where I got the living dungeon idea from. That there's dungeons, and the dungeons are kind of a semi-living being, which keep then recreating the monsters in it, and also the treasure you can find. And this guy's running this town and he discovers there's a dungeon in his property. So he gets like the dungeon guild to come and investigate his dungeon and rate it. And then so other dungeons will come like adventurers will come along and go into his dungeon. And then he gets a cut of what they're doing, because that's the way dungeons work in that world, that they're, there's a reason for them existing, and therefore they have to. But yeah, I do like the idea of you got into this dungeon and come out and there's a bunch of tax collectors at the end saying, you owe us a cut.
Hey, thanks so much for that. Also, or it could be like like a hunting preserve.
Yeah,
You got someone who some petty noble or somebody, maybe a band of outlaws, and a band of outlaws, whatever, they don't want to go in the dungeon. They don't feel like it. So they just sit up top, and it's like, you want to go down in there? Okay, sure. All right, you got to pay your admission fee, and here's your license fee, and you're like, what? And then you go down in there, and then yeah, that could make it interesting.
Yeah, that's certainly changing.
Just different. I don't know. I sometimes find it amusing to inject a little bit some of the pains and tedious irritations of real life into into a story, just a little bit. You could, I'll throw this at you and then I'll shut up. You could also I had written years ago, there was a gaming group here in town. We were trying to come up with a shared, this is like right around the time 5e, 4e, 5, I don't know, was it 5e? Anyway, it was a long time ago. Actually, it was right around the time Pathfinder First Edition came out. There was a group of us who were trying to build a shared world that folks in the local gaming community could then use and add to. And I came up with an idea for this town, like out in the middle of nowhere, and part of the town's economy was wrapped up in adventurers coming through town, buying supplies to go into this dungeon complex. I didn't address the issue of hyperinflation that could happen when people keep coming back with heaps of gold and all of a sudden they just like buy out all the stores in town. But actually, the truth of the matter was, behind the scenes, there was an agreement between the crooked, sketchy town leadership and the entity that was running the dungeon. And so it was like the entity, like, I forgot what the big bad was in the dungeon, but the big bad in the dungeon used adventurers as a form of pest control against like the goblins and the crappier things like carrion crawlers and those kinds of like the dungeon, the lower level denizens of the thing. And then the town would get, I forgot how I set it up, but it was like some sleazy kickback scheme where the town fed adventurers to the dungeon basically, and then the town also profited off the adventurers when they came through the town and paid ridiculously inflated prices for iron rations and things like that.
Yeah, that is another thing. If there is a dungeon in a particular place where the players aren't used to, actually having the local townspeople properly fleece the players, because they know, they literally charge them different prices. Why are you charging? Oh, he's a local guy. He gets special local discount. You're sorry, you're out of town, so we're adding an extra tax on top of you lot. And the players like, so you have to take all this stuff somewhere else.
Well, that makes sense. Like there are plenty of places. Think about like museums.
Yeah,
there's a museum not even 10 minutes from my house that, like, if you're a local, if you're a county resident, you get a discount. Yeah, I like that. Players are like, what? And then you get that really tedious player who's like, well, it says in the player's handbook that this is, shut up.
No, it doesn't say. Yeah, it says the player's handbook. That is superseded by the Dungeon Master's Guide.
That's right. It's like, well, it says this costs this much. Sorry, it's not Traveler. We're not assuming that everything costs the exact same amount across the whole flipping universe.
That's what it costs until I say otherwise.
Yes, yeah. I am the inflation. I am the invisible hand.
It's inflation. That book came out 10 years ago, so we've got 10 years of inflation since that book.
That's a good point.
Inflation's really high at the moment. So
that's right. That's right.
Also, so that's in gold pieces. We're using a different currency, so the exchange rate's not favorable at the moment.
Yeah, that could be an irritant. Or you could throw something at them like, hey, listen, the fantasy central banks, they have crappy monetary policy too, and they've been flooding the market with like worthless cash. So yeah, it's the same thing. Oh my goodness, that's beautiful.
These poor players like, I'm trying to play a role of fantasy game, not an economics. Like, sorry.
What are you doing to me? Yeah.
Fancy
okay, so what else? How else can we make, or is there anything else we can throw? Do we want to move to something else? We've got the dungeon as a location to get things started. What else can we do to make it different and interesting?
I I think we should go back to the idea that you raised last time, sort of a reason both for why the players are doing something and why they're together, which is your idea of a
Yeah.
debt. And particularly a group debt. Like, so we said we had an idea of, one player might owe someone money. But I really like the idea that you suggested, like of a group debt, so that, and because it gave us two things: one, the reason the players have to keep doing something, and the reason they're doing something, but also a reason those players are together. Because obviously, one of the weirdest things about D&D is, like you said earlier, like a kitchen sink party where you've got these, why is a cleric with a wizard and a thief and a paladin and it doesn't make any sense. But if they've
And then you
all,
got like wackadoo. You got that one person who's like, I'm chaotic neutral.
yeah, I mean, that's one of the things. That's why you have to talk to these people ahead of time, because you just go, I've got a lawful good paladin and I'm a chaotic evil assassin. No, you're not. One of you is changing, and the paladin can't change, so it's the other guy. Because it doesn't make any sense. But yeah, if there's a reason that they're together. So your idea of like a debt that the players owe someone a money or a favor or whatever else, maybe that's because of where they come from, or it's a family thing, or you'd said that actually the debt was belonging to someone else, but someone's passed on the debt. And so maybe there's literally a debt collector who collects all these different debts for favors and brings together. And then, now I've got an adventuring party that, because these debts have been passed from person to person, I can now collect on these people, and you get a letter that says, go to this place. And then the guy's right, all of you, your debts have been passed to me. So now you all owe me.
I like that.
And then you've got to work together. And then the players can't really go, well, no, because, they have to, that's the kind of they have to do it. And then you've got a reason to why they're together and why they've got to do something. At that point, they can do essentially anything.
Well, I remember in the original West End game Star Wars, the smuggler template came with a stock light freighter and a 25,000 credit debt.
Well, then the new, the Fantasy Flight Edge of Empire, that's you could get extra character points or money by having your character start with debt. So one of the things you'd have it's like this debt table. Now that was usually you all owed money to different people, but again, the idea was pretty sound.
I like, if you have a fantasy setting that has a reasonably developed urban side to it, because I don't think you're going to find something like mature banking and debt collection. You're not going to find that in your edge of not as much, at least. You'd have to put more into the story at like the edge of the frontier. But if you had, even not necessarily where the adventure starts, if you had something of an urban area that was more, call it organizationally advanced, I think that's perfectly reasonable. I think actually that could be an interesting way for a GM to take potentially overwrought, overlong player backstories, and say, okay, I'm going to extract this from this one and this from this one. How do we bundle that debt together? Well, someone bought it up. Yeah. I mean, that's clever. And then comes to them and says, listen, I don't care what it was. That also actually changes the nature of the patron. The patron's not a good guy. He's not a bad guy. The patron is just someone to whom you owe money, and chances are, or owe something, and chances are that the patron owes money to something else. So it's like, this is just business. You just got to do it.
Yeah, I think it's important, like you say, about the backstory, because obviously one thing you can use to generate adventure ideas is a backstory, but it's difficult when you've got different, some players might turn up with a huge, complicated, long backstory, or you might have done a session 0 where you come up with the backstories together, or you have my guys who basically don't do a backstory is not a thing. They don't do backstory. We came up with ours as a group thing, luckily this time, so we had some kind of backstory. Yeah, if you've got backstory, you can weave those things in. But if someone's got this long, detailed 20-year backstory and they're expecting you to weave this into every session, it probably doesn't go with some other stuff. No. So it's not always going to be possible. But backstory is a good place to go for ideas. But if you're trying to do a dungeon crawl, that's not going to satisfy most people. They can't, not all of the players can have some family relic which is in the dungeon you're going to, but one of them might be able to do.
But that helps though, because it would enable you to translate. It would enable you to translate each of those different backstory hooks to put them together, because someone just, again, if it's like a marker, you just owe someone, it got sold. It breaks those original ties where you don't have to deal so much with the minutia of the overwrought backstory, and you can bring that together. And again, that would be a different kind of patron, not a, he's not shady. She's not, driven like, white like the driven snow and perfect, oh, I need you to help me, and that kind of thing. It's like, no, you just owe me, and if you don't, then I'm going to turn you over to the authorities and you're going to get arrested. And it's not because I don't like you, it's just because you owe me money. All right, so that's a means by which, and then we have a location, the dungeon. What's a different means by which or location?
I mean, one I mentioned briefly, we kind of said when we're doing sci-fi, the chances are you belong to an organization. That stuff actually still works in fantasy. There's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with you having, the Thieves Guild or the Warriors Guild, the Major Guild. Or again, you could just have an Adventurers Guild. I mean, there's a set of computer games called the Fable series. The second two don't know, but in the first one, you literally have like a hero academy where if you're like an adventurer slash hero type person, that's what you do. You go and join them, and then you train, and then you get like your license, and now you can go off into the world. I mean, Pathfinder literally have that. The
Yeah.
Pathfinder Society is essentially meant to be
Yep.
kind of, people go off and explore and do adventure and stuff. It's there in the background though. It's not, despite being the name of the game, isn't really front and foremost saying you have to be a member of the Pathfinder Society.
Yeah.
But there's nothing wrong with you then having an organization that, picks people. That there are fantasy that does do that. You have to do something, you get your license, now you're an officially recognized adventurer, which means rather than having to, oh, where do I go to, and dodgy patrons and stuff, well, you work on a commission for these guys, or
Hmm.
you go to the guild, and the guild will say, oh, well, someone's come to us with this kind of thing, which is a different way of doing it. I mean, that's kind of, maybe we're in a setting where if there's adventure as a ten a penny, that's probably a more realistic thing that would happen, but
Yeah.
it's not something you see a huge amount. And then similar to that would be the kind of, it's cheesy, but the message board in the town square where you turn up in the town you've never been to, and things do it. But you think actually, well, that's kind of what happens in the real world. You have a point where it's a town message board, or we often have it in our supermarkets or in your stores or something, where it's a place that people can go to put up requests. Now, obviously, a lot of people now do that on social media or something, but we don't have that in a fancy world. How can you put a request up with something? Well, yeah, you write it on a piece of paper and you stick it on a board, and that's a board that people are going to go to. Now, again, that you could argue that's tropey, but actually, if you think about it, that makes sense. I've got a big rat in my basement. How do I
Yeah.
get someone to do it? Well, I'm going to stick it on a post until someone comes along and sorts it out for me,
That's
or
actually,
someone's
wow.
gone missing.
That's
You know,
interesting. I had not thought about that connection. Like, there's a Facebook forum, like everywhere. There's a Facebook forum for my area, my
yeah, I do.
neighborhood and stuff. And all the time, and my wife and I have done it all the time. You go on there and you're like, "Hey, I need this kind of work done. Who's had a good experience? Could you send me the name of someone?" And then you get a bunch of folks that at least people are, I don't know, they're thoughtful enough about it. Either they really liked the service they got or really hated the service they got. And it's interesting actually. Pathfinder Kingmaker Adventure Path has, throughout those books, there are fake notices for work that are supposed to be like those things that are slapped up on like a town message board. Yeah, actually, that's it's the funny thing about it. That's tropey because that's real. It
Yeah.
just looks a little different now. It looks, yeah, than it did in the past.
I mean, it's the same as coming back to the tavern thing. Although the tavern thing is tropey, you live out in the wilderness. You need someone to do something
Yep.
dangerous for your kids have been kidnapped by some monsters and taken off to a dungeon. You can't do it yourself, right? Well, nowadays you would go and you would phone the police. Well, you don't have a phone, so you have to walk to the nearest town.
Right.
Now you get to the nearest town, the guard aren't going to go and get your
No.
people because the guard are guarding the town. So what you need an adventurer. Where are you going to find an adventurer in a town? The tavern. Where else are they going to be?
Right.
The tavern is the local meeting place where everyone will turn up, because that's where you can go. You can get food there, you get lodging there, you can meet people there.
Yep.
So again, yes, it is tropey, but it's
But it makes
tropey for,
sense.
it makes sense. So yes, you don't want to have every single mission starting with, I mean, unless you literally have a corner of the bar after you've done a bunch of sessions where you've kind of written up your rates and your name of your
Actually,
adventuring party.
that would be I think that would be a way to make that very tropey location more interesting and personalize it. You do have something where like, after people start to gain reputation through the story, there's like hash marks, or there's a little drawing of them, or there's like their sign, something like that. Actually,
There's a
that I think that would breathe some life into something
yeah.
that otherwise could be a very disposable, tropey location.
There was a comic series I was reading called Rat Queens, which is a fantasy comic, and it's about a group of female adventurers. But they start off always based in one town, but there's like 3 or 4 other adventuring parties in the same town. So then they are rivals with each other, because they're all bidding for the same contract. And actually, that's another way of spinning it straight away. Someone comes in, I need an adventurer, and there's 4 different parties. They'll say, we'll do it. And then you're like, so then now you're going to have to do it for who's going to do the mission for the lowest price. And you might have, straight away there, you might not be taking them. I think actually having a rival adventuring party, even if it's just on a friendly nature for that, that's another good way of doing things, because actually the idea that you're the only adventuring party
Silly.
that's around is silly. I mean, I think we mentioned this in the other short one, this idea of, when you're the only, you see this a lot in computer role playing, you're the only person doing
Only
any
ship
of
in the
these
quadrant.
missions. Yeah, all these people doing different things and needing help, and you're the only person there that can help. And you think this is daft. So again, don't fall into that trap. Let there be other adventurers. If there's lots of stuff that needs doing, if you don't take a particular quest or don't help someone, well, then there's another adventuring party that does, and maybe then they're competing with you on doing stuff. It doesn't have to come to violence. It can be friendly competition,
Sure.
but essentially they're a rival business doing, if that's your job, if we're adventurers, right, well then so are those guys.
There were Cyberpunk 2020 adventures that had that aspect to it. I mean, you're in one place, you're in this city, Night City, and you are going to interact with other people who work in your gray world, violent realm. And there are going to be jobs that other people are going to actually, that would be an interesting way to flesh out like a greater location. Like say you decide, okay, we're going to start this campaign, at least for a while, from a town or a village, a little smaller maybe, that's on the frontier, that's in a place where there's, the farther you get from town, the more dangerous it gets. And then you can plug in interesting places like dungeons and crap like that. And yeah, I mean, a place like that would potentially draw people like adventurers. I mean, it's like California Gold Rush.
Yeah.
Okay. It's going to draw people who want to do that kind of work or see opportunity in it. So the idea that unless you were in this little burg and you're you're the locals, you're the good, you're the ones who have the potential to, and they turn to you because everyone else is either cowardly or worthless. So they turn to you to solve their problems. If it's some place where that work is needed to be done, then it's going to draw other adventurers. And I think that's a good point. Baking in the idea that, like, yeah, this is friendly competition, or maybe not. It's maybe not friendly, but it's competition. But that doesn't mean you kill them.
Yeah.
And over time, you could actually build in those as persistent, interesting NPCs. You could have throw your players for a loop by doing something like a few sessions in, there's some adventuring party that they beat us to the punch, or they took that job before we did. Maybe the party is running low on funds and another party took the job they wanted to take, so now they have to take the crappier job, but then they find out that party got wiped out, and so then they go to that place and they find one or two of those party members as prisoners or something like that. That could actually be, that'd be a way to flesh out NPCs and flesh out parts of the story through those characters.
I think as well as that, you can do something that you can't do in computer games, or at least you don't see it very well, where you actually have sort of time things. You didn't take the mission, so someone else did. You go on one day and there's 5 missions on there, and you take one. When you come back, well, a bunch of the other ones have gone because someone else did them. Unlike most computer games where you see this guy and you go and talk to him and you say, okay, I might do your quest, but then you go and talk to another guy. You do the third guy's quest, but the first guy and the second guy's quest is still completely doable because time isn't an issue. Whereas in the real world, that wouldn't happen. The first guy's kids are now dead, so he doesn't, he wants, now he wants revenge because you didn't rescue them. You can do different things. So, by all means, there's plenty of places to take inspiration. Add that extra stuff. And a rival adventuring party is great. When I was like, almost could have an auction. There's a guy there saying, right, here's the 3 meat, kind of, that thing you have where if you have places where the jobs aren't fixed and the people turn up in the morning and say, I want to work.
Yeah.
And the guy goes, I'm going to hire you, you, and you. You can do the same thing with quests. I have 3 quests up for grabs today. Who's going to do it right? Party number 1. Okay, you could do this one and you can do this one, and people might bid against each other. That would be there's cool things you could do if you do think differently about how are these quests and stuff being awarded, particularly if, like you said, you're on the edge of a frontier where it's super dangerous and there are lots of monsters that need defeating and ruins that need clearing out and people's farms that have been overrun by goblins again.
Yeah, I think you could also add to that, you as GM, like as you're coming up with different ideas for short adventures within a given setting that you're fleshing out. I mean, setting like a location, and it's like that village, that town. If you could come up with a few ideas that would be more time sensitive, like my kid got kidnapped, or something that needs to be dealt with now, or it's going to pass, or something that's a little longer term. So you have a couple of seeds. And then based on interest from your players, well, they take the one that's more time sensitive, and then they come back from that. And some of the other time sensitive, obviously, those ones are gone. But maybe there's one that's a little longer term that they could deal with, like, oh yeah, the such and such Farmer Bob needs assistance with like maintaining his lands against whatever. And that's not something that needs to be done. He wants it to be done now, but that's something that maybe if people don't take that job, it just sits there. I like the bidding. I also like that you could have some well-meaning or some busybody of a local official or some other, like maybe some other adventuring party leader comes up and says, we need some kind of a certification system, or, something like that, like a guild, or offers to create an adventurers guild. So, you get the rival adventuring party leader comes over to you and says, you know what, if we work together, we could benefit. And the town then becomes like, we're not competing with each other. We work together. They form a guild. That could actually be really interesting to add more of those other things that you so rarely scrape beneath the surface and experience.
I think there's a point with a lot of fantasy games where they want to be the next great fantasy novels. Yeah. They go big, they go very big, very quickly, particularly if people have got the big backstories and stuff. Yeah. I mean, we're intended to go that way. Well, some of us in our campaigns, we're going to some extent, we're going that way quicker, but it's kind of as you go up through the levels, level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you shouldn't be doing anything or inspiring or amazing. The reality is you're, not much more powerful than a normal soldier or something. So you shouldn't be saving the world. Yeah. When you hit the level, 19, 20, then you're stupidly powerful now.
That was one thing I remember with 4E that they at least tried to say, like levels 1 through 10, you're helping like you're doing things at like the local level, and then like 10 through, or like 11 through 20, you're doing things at like the regional level, and then 21, the upper tier, epic tier, whatever the heck it was called, you're doing things like the world level. Like, okay, I get that as an idea.
I was just gonna, just building onto that point. It's what the original D&D, well, it's not the original D&D basic, but it's the one I remember as being the original D&D had, because you had the basic box, which was you were in dungeons, and then expert was now you go out into the wilderness and do hex crawls, and then you had, I can never remember if it was companion or campaign, but it was going with a C, and it was the light blue box
companion,
where you had
the gigantic like anime sword on the cover.
And you had the rules in there for building like castles and stuff. So that was the idea. And then like your character classes went into having, henchmen and people and armies and stuff. And then you were into the silly realms of the other ones. So I think it's important to actually, the idea that you have to have these massive, big campaign ideas from a really low, it doesn't make any sense. Why are the low level guys saving the world or doing things that are major? It's weird. So start small and build big. If you want to do big right from the start at level 10.
Yeah.
You don't have to, there's no rule that says you have to start at level 1 or 3. You start at whatever level you want.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the things that frustrates me about a lot of the published D&D and Pathfinder things. Although Pathfinder have done some recently to start higher level, they always start at the low level. Every single one of them is, level 3 to 10. level 3 to 11, level
Yep.
3 to 15. You're like, how about releasing something which is level 10 to 20? None of the published D&D stuff even gets close to those higher levels. What's the point of having rules that are level 15 to 20 if no one ever gets to play at them? I mean, maybe the game breaks at that level, so that's why no
Maybe
one
they
does. I
secretly
don't know.
know that.
Pathfinder's done the same. All their adventure paths tend to be these really strict sort of level progressions. I know they have done some in the last few years. We're gonna just start at a higher level. But
yeah, I think I
yeah.
agree completely. The idea that every single story has to end with this massive battle for existence, a hole in the sky opens up and a bunch of crap comes pouring out of it. It's just like, no, you don't need that. Like, and I think the trouble with that too is, it's like that line from The Incredibles. I've used it many times. Like, when everyone's super, no one is. When
Yeah.
everything is awesome and epic and then nothing is. Like, you've got nowhere to go. It becomes ridiculous. Like, I would rather develop a setting, develop a place, develop NPCs that are interesting, and give the characters, give the players an opportunity by doing that to actually develop their own connections with that place and those people and those themes, so that they end up starting to drive part of the story creation. That was one of the wonderful things about Pathfinder Kingmaker is you develop your own holding and you build upon it and you build around it and you grow it. And I mean, I suppose you could just hand wave, like, as you, in that, there's a overly crunchy, big surprise, it's from Paizo, subsystem for expanding and managing your kingdom hex by hex. And so as you subdue and bring hexes on the map under your control, I mean, I guess you could just hand wave it and treat it like a game. I didn't, I mean, my players were super psyched though about, like, oh, we've got to go out there, and I'd have like the angry Flat Earth Society, like, trappers, like, you're not gonna tell me what to do, and so they would have to go out and politic with them and, like, convince them, like, so that they're not a pain in the butt as they try to govern, whatever you want to call it, some area of their kingdom. If you don't keep trying to look like, what's the most awesome thing I can do, if you just look at the normal stuff and flesh it out and do it well, I think you might have more fun.
Yeah, I
It
certainly
takes the pressure off.
when we used the campaign rules and played them sort of running a kingdom, they were a lot of fun. They took a lot of time, but to the point where we did that on a spreadsheet and kind of ran that in between the gaming sessions, because it was basically, it was like doing accountancy or something. It was very complex, but it wasn't great for an actual gaming session. But the stuff it let you do and think about was a lot of fun. Yeah, I think fantasy really can go along with big ways, but I think it's this usual case of actually thinking what is going to work for my players. What do my players? Maybe your players want to go like right to the start. We want right from the start. Oh, we want to go really big for things, right? Well, then start at a higher level.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense to have people fighting for the fate of a kingdom at level 3.
Yeah.
Because they're going to just die.
Or working for the wealthy, powerful patron to stop the breakdown of resurrection magic, like in Tomb of Annihilation.
Because it doesn't make sense, does it?
Nope.
There's this really, really important thing, which is changing the fabric of our society. Let's get some absolute noobs to come and solve.
Let's get some amateurs.
They go to the people
I'm trying
who
to
are
save
like
money.
the big guys. It's just like, doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So, link it out. If you want to have things which are generally super important and earth shattering, then just start at a higher level. That's fine.
Yeah.
No one's saying you can't do that. And if you want something that's going to stay low level for a long time, then change the progression.
Yeah.
We've said it a bunch of times. DMs or GMs and players, they need to talk to each other. What do we want out of this game? Yeah. How long are we running for? We kind of had this idea at the start of the year, right? We'd run for a year. We'll play 3 campaigns, and if we play a game a week and level up most weeks, that we might be hitting high levels. I mean, the rate I'm going, easily I could get their characters up to level 20 because I'm running more than the other two. We're now in March. I've run 4 sessions. Brian's run 4 sessions. Scott's run 1. So we're a bit behind on this.
Hey, even if you played weekly, if by breaking it up like that, I mean, depending, you'd have a lot of control over how quickly advanced. But this is good, actually. Here in this amount of time, we've talked about the apex trope place and hook, place where the job comes into being, and then the apex trope, where does the job take place, location, the tavern, the patron, the dungeon. And I think we've added some things to it that could be make it more interesting. And then it's fun because on the one side it's kind of silly because it is so tropey, but it works.
Yeah, I think the thing with a lot of tropes are tropes because they work. We said that for sci-fi, the distress call's tropey, but it works. So
yeah,
if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Okay, I love it. Look at that, we've just solved a problem. We made people's lives better. Thank you so much for listening. You can visit our show's homepage at anchor.fm/fluff and crunch. That's FLUFFNCRUNCH. We would really appreciate feedback and reviews on whatever podcasting platform you're listening to this on. Thanks so much.